Well, good morning. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I'm thankful today that God has brought us together, gave us a little bit of moisture over the weekend. Hope you stayed safe. Looks like some people are still not sure about the roads. Tell me it's a holiday weekend without telling me it's a holiday weekend, kind of looking around this morning. But I have a bag here, and it's a bag full of medals. And I will call this the story of middle school and high school track from 1985 to 1990. So it all is probably right here. There's probably a few medals that are no longer there. And before you think that I was this incredible track star or something, most of these medals, especially the ones that are individual, will say 4th, 5th, and 6th place. Wasn't a spectacular athlete. Track was a fun sport for me, and one of the reasons is there was a point A and a point B, and I just had to get from point A to point B without falling. If there was too much coordination involved, I was pretty much out. Now, most of these medals are for running the 800 meters. Now, there's a few 1,600 meters, a few 3,200 meters, and so on like that. But most of them were that particular race right there. And somewhere in this bag is a medal from one particular track meet that happened in Ashland, Kansas. If you mean is where Ashland, Kansas is, it's close enough to Oklahoma to have red dirt. Okay? And it was 1989, and I had just finished running the 800, and just a little bit after that, I ran another 800 as part of the 3,200 relay, and I was at the concession stands. I had taken the $5 bill that my dad had given me. It was our league track meet, our conference track meet, and I was done, so Dr. Pepper and hot dogs were on the menu. So I'm standing there with hot dog and Dr. Pepper, and actually with two of the guys that I had run the relay race with. And as we're chowing down, thinking our day is done, our coach is approaching us. And he approaches us and says, "Guys, I need you to run the 3,200 meters in about 15 minutes. And I've already got one hot dog down and working on another one and so on. But there's a reason behind this. You see, our school was a track school. For 9 years in a row, we had won the league championship. In fact, we went 9 years, other than state, not losing a single track meet. And so this would have been 10 years in a row that we would have won the league meet. It's near the end of the track meet, and he basically says, "Boys, we need the points. So I've signed you up for the 3,200 meters." Now, what we didn't realize until we got there, he had signed us up weeks ago. But I remember him saying this, and I absolutely hated running the 3,200 meters. Number one, it's 2 miles, right? But it's boring. It's 8 times around the track. And if you're a guy running 8 times around the track and you've got ADD, you're just thinking, I've got 8 more to go, 7 more to go, 6 more to go. I mean, that's just the way my mind works. So I'm none too thrilled about this. But I remember Coach DeVore saying, just run the race and make sure you place. So I got to the starting line, and I again was full of junk food and started to run the 3,200 meters. And let me just tell you an incredible story. I dug deep. And went through the pain of stomach cramps and just the blah of sugar and carbs and meat-ish sort of stuff. And I got first place. And we won the meet, and I would love to tell you that that's a true story, but that's not. I got 6th place, right? The three of us that were running the race, we all got fourth, fifth, and sixth. And to tell you where I was in sixth place. So I got a point for our team. And it didn't matter anyway because we would have won by 30 or 40 points when the meet was over. At the end of the meet, our coach said, "Yeah, I just wanted to get you guys conditioning for regionals next week." But I think about what he said was just run the race. And whether we know it or not as Christians, we kind of get the same message from the writer of Hebrews that if we're walking with Jesus, the call for each and every one of us is to run the race. Run the race that God has placed us on. And listen, we don't get the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm out. If you're following Jesus, you're in the race, and that is a huge expectation that is placed upon you. So this morning we're going to look at what it looks like to run the race. We're going to look at what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus and be called into an incredible journey with Jesus. So we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 12. Chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 are my two favorite verses together in the entirety of the Bible. And so I would love to just stay in verses 1 and 2, but we're gonna kind of move through all of this here today. But let's begin with verses 1 through 3. In fact, I'm going to read verse 1. We'll kind of leave this up here because I want to tear this apart a little bit, and we'll get into verses 2 and 3 here in a second. It says, "Therefore." Now, again, we have to do that whole thing. If you see a therefore, you got to ask what it's there for. Remember, last week we talked about the hall of faith, those who had endured and persevered and were faithful to the end, great stories of faith. And so he says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses." So these are the people that have gone before us. These are the people who have finished the race. These are the people, if you can kind of get this picture in your mind, that are in a coliseum and are now cheering for you and I as we are in the Christian race. There's an incredible picture here with this. But then he also says, "Let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." We are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. We are surrounded by people who are in the spiritual realm now, who have finished the race, they've crossed the line, they have endured and persevered to the end. And now we are in the race until we cross the finish line and we begin to become a motivation for people who are coming behind us. Now with this, it says that we are to, now notice this, it says, "Let us lay aside every weight." Now, the NLT, I like the way it says, "the weight that slows us down." If you've ever run a race, you know that you don't want to carry extra baggage with you. It's actually not good. Listen, I'm about 45 pounds. Lighter than I was about 10, 12, 14 years ago. And I noticed that my knees don't hurt as much. Why? Because I'm carrying around less, right? So there's something about that. But I think one of the things we have to come to grips with, when it says that we are to throw off everything that hinders, there are certain things in our life that are not sinful, but are not beneficial to our walk and journey with Jesus. And so let's just ask this question: what is it in your life that is not sinful, but is not beneficial for you in running your race for Jesus and with Jesus? You see, this is where it kind of gets tough, because I think our life is filled with a lot of stuff that is not necessarily beneficial. And so basically, one of the things that we understand here is that there are items in our life not sinful, not beneficial, but there are also things that are sinful. In fact, when it talks about sin, I love what it says in the NIV. Here it says it clings so closely. The NIV says it easily entangles. The NLT says it trips us up. The idea here is that sin gets a hold of us, and there is this spiraling out of control. But the idea is that anything in our lives that impede walking with Jesus, the writer of Hebrews says, as you're running this race, you need to lay those things off to the side. So we do that because we are instructed to run with endurance. We are told, and I think this is something that we have to understand. You've maybe heard that the Christian walk and the Christian race is not a sprint, rather it's a marathon. In fact, there is a long game that comes in walking with Jesus. We'll talk about that here in a few moments. But I love the way it says here that we run the race, or we run the course that is marked out for us. Now, I want to make this highly individual. Have you ever looked at somebody else's life, at somebody else's race, at somebody else's house, car, spouse, whatever it may be, and said, yeah, I want that one right there. I want that race. I want that walk with Jesus. They have it much better than me. Now, one of the things my wife will say is like social media. We judge 100% of our lives based on the top 5 that people put out on social media. And we say our life ought to be more like theirs. But what we're not seeing is the private pain and suffering that sometimes people are walking through that they never put out in life. But I also think about this. I think about yesterday. I just kind of threw this in this morning. Yesterday, I was cruising through Facebook, and the wife of my best friend from college posted that yesterday was their 28th anniversary. Pretty cool. And the picture that she reshared was the bridal party up on the stage in the church. You know, all the groomsmen and so on like that. And I looked at that picture, and there are like 5 of us that our lives were intertwined in college. And there's Mark, he's my friend that got married, and there was David, there was Judd, there was myself, and there was a guy by the name of Chad. And if you would have taken a snapshot of and looked back at those young men 28 years ago and said, where do you think God would take them? Everybody would have had their own ideas, right? Everybody would have had their own opinions. But I think about this, I think about looking at that, like Mark, everybody said Mark's going to be the senior pastor guy. We're all Bible college guys. And Mark was like this guy that he ended up in megachurch world, and he was like an administrator. And right now he's running a homeless ministry in Amarillo. And nobody would have said, there's that guy. He would have been doing a homeless ministry 30 years after this. Nobody would have said that. Nobody would have picked David for running an international ministry that builds homes in places like Mexico and Guatemala and different Latin American countries. Nobody would have said he would have been there. I mean, there was one guy, his name's Judd. Everybody knew he was going to be a pastor of a church of like 20,000. Guess what Judd's doing today? He's a pastor of a church of 20,000. I wouldn't have pegged me being in New Mexico for 22 years. Everybody thought Chad would be a great youth minister. Chad lasted about a year in the ministry and went off and did life. But where our stories were going 28 years ago are not where our stories end up today. And you can probably look at your life right now and say, the journey I'm on, the life that I'm living right now is not the life that I planned out for myself, but God has placed me in a race. And He's placed me in a journey. And we are just called to simply be faithful in that. So let's go ahead and read on, because I think there's something very important. It says, looking to Jesus. And I think this, like, if I'm going to underline something, I'm going to underline looking to Jesus here. So as I'm running my race, I throw off everything that hinders, but I keep my focus and my attention on Jesus. But there's a reason why. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider Him who endured from sinners such hostility against Himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. I love this here, that we get to focus our lives on Jesus. And we do so for two reasons. Number one, it says that he is the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. This word for pioneer here is the trailblazer. When you think about the people, have you ever driven over through the western United States and thought, how did they get from all the way over there to all the way over here? Somebody in a covered wagon had to open a path. Okay, and they opened a path that made it easier for other people to follow in that path. When it says that Jesus is the pioneer of our faith, he is the one who opened the path. But it's not just that he opened the path, he finished the race. And so therefore, since he is finished, there's motivation that we too can finish. And so what we do, and this is going to be big for today, we run the race marked out for you with your eyes focused on Jesus. And we do that because Jesus finished the race. Now, one of the beautiful things here about finishing the race, as we look here, is this right here. God is not going to ask us to enter a race that he is not going to prepare us for. He's not going to say, okay, first day of practice, don't know any of the plays, don't know anything that's going on, go ahead and get in the game. Basically what we find is God is going to prepare us for the life that he has given us. And sometimes that is uncomfortable. Notice verses 4 through 10. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. So basically saying, listen, life's uncomfortable, but we haven't gone to this extent yet. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addressed you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all of you participated, then you are illegitimate children, not sons. Besides this, we've had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live and live? For they disciplined us for a short time, as it seemed best for them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. Now, in order to run the race, we had to be prepared. And the way God prepares us for the Christian walk is through discipline that happens when we endure difficult things in life. And listen, when we talk about discipline, how many of us, when we hear this word, especially connected to a parent, do we connect discipline to punitive measures? Right? I think a lot of us do. In fact, there's those memes going around Facebook and different things like, I survived the spanky spoon. And I have to say that my oldest will probably tell you he survived, but there was probably a spanky spoon or two that did not. Right? There's one like, you can't scare me. I've held a flashlight for my dad. Anybody? Okay. And so we talk about that kind of from the aspect that we think discipline is all about punitive measures. And so let's just be honest. In our world today, when you hear discipline and it is connected to a parent or a father, there's many of you who understand the heavy hand of discipline, and sometimes it wasn't discipline. You understand the heavy hand of abuse. You understand that sometimes there was alcohol involved or stress and depression involved, and you just became a lightning rod for your parents' anger. That's not discipline, that's abuse. And so with that in mind, we have to understand that God has a plan with all of the stuff we go through in life, and I think most of us would rather not walk through difficult circumstances. Do you agree with that? How many of you just say, I know I've said this before, I just want something to be easy. Ever said that? Maybe God doesn't want everything to be easy. In fact, notice verse 11. In verse 11, it says, "For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it." Now, I think it's important that we look at the word train here. I believe God's discipline is to teach us, to correct us, to train us, to guide us in life. And so when we have to endure difficult people, maybe God is using that for His glory. And when we have to walk through illness, and when we have to walk through death, and we have to walk through job loss, and we have to walk through financial stress, we have to walk through a world that is becoming increasingly unfriendly to Christians, maybe God is using all of that to transform us. In fact, I'm going to say this, and whatever it is that you're walking through, whatever it is that you're going to walk through, whatever you have walked through, lean into God's discipline, which is transforming you. It is changing you. It is making you into a different person. In fact, let me say it this way. I'm going to be all churchy here. God's end game with discipline is sanctification. God's end game is to change you to become more and more like Jesus. That's really kind of what we're talking about here. God's not like just taking you through the fire just because, hey, this will be fun. He is taking you through fire to refine you and change you and transform you. And listen, if our earthly fathers were willing to discipline us, to train us and correct us, God is a better father. And He loves you too much to make life easy and simple. Because He is preparing you, not necessarily just for this race, He is preparing you for eternity. Let's go ahead and read on. Let's look at verses 12 and 13. It says, "Therefore, lift up your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed." Now, I had a little struggle with this, and so I'm going to give you Brandon Shaffer's translation of what the writer of Hebrews is saying here. He is saying, stop sulking and get in the race. That's basically what he's getting at. Like, listen, I know life is not easy. I know it's difficult. I know that people don't like you. I know people are making life difficult for you, that you are walking through difficult times, but stop whining. I use a Jim Buchelman-ism. You're not a victim. Get in the race and stay in the race. That's basically what he is saying here. But then we get to verse 14. And verse 14 says, "Strive for peace with everyone and for holiness, without which no one will see the Lord." I love this statement, strive for peace with everyone. There's a brand of Christianity that was popular probably 10 to 25 years ago. And I always called this the brand of Christianity of my Jesus can kick your Jesus butt. It was like this super masculine, like get in your face. You don't have to be nice. You can bowl over people, roll over people. That was kind of the brand of Christianity. But it doesn't jive with strive to live at peace with everyone. And so part of walking with Jesus, part of running the race, part of being in the race is the whole idea of community. And we have to do what we can, believe it or not, to get along with everyone. That's what we're called to be and what we're called to do. And not just that we are really to strive to be good, that we are striving to be holy, which means that we're completely different than the rest of the world. Now notice verse 15. Verse 15 says, "See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God and that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. So see to it that no one fails to receive grace. Basically, what we're saying here is that we are in the race for ourselves, but we are also in this race for one another. We are here to strengthen one another, encourage one another, pray for one another, that we're here to help everyone receive the full grace of God. But it also says that no root of bitterness spring up. Now, when you're walking through difficult times, when things are not easy, when you look at other people's races and you go, why didn't I get that one? Anybody? It is so easy to become bitter. It is so easy to just like spew poison because we think that God is like this great cosmic killjoy who just can't wait to punish us. It says, be careful that as you're walking through this difficulty, that you don't become bitter in the process. Have you ever felt yourself becoming bitter? Have you ever found yourself just thinking, life stinks and it's all God's fault? I can't tell you how many times somebody has sat in my office and they said these very words, why does God hate me? Because we don't understand what God is doing with the discipline through the difficult times that we're going through in life. Now notice verses 16 and 17. So see to it, basically, that no one is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. For you know that afterward, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected. For he found no chance to repent, though he sought it with tears. This is kind of a different angle on the story of Esau, because if you go back to the story of Jacob and Esau, there is no evidence that he was sexually immoral. But what we do find is an individual, because he was hungry, because he was living in the moment, because he lacked impulse control, gave away his inheritance for a bowl of soup. And so I look at the general thing to say it can be very dangerous for us to live in the moment. It can be very dangerous for us to lack impulse control. It can be very dangerous for us to go into a situation and place where we're not thinking of the future and we're only thinking of the now. And how many times do we find ourselves just wanting to live in the moment? And so after that moment, Esau was like, oh, well, I take it back. No, bless me. And God was like, through his father, there's no blessing available now for you. And so what I see here in these verses, I think it's interesting. If we look at the grand scheme of things, we've got the big picture here, run the race. And then we kind of look at lean in to what God is doing to transform us as we are in the race. And finally, we live out the Father's discipline. As we're in the race, we are allowing this discipline to really kind of be blossoming in our lives. So we live out the Father's discipline in the context of church community. We do this with one another. We don't do this on our own. There's a lot of people that will say, my religious views are on my own. I walk with Jesus on my own. There is nothing in the Bible that ever suggests that we should do this thing on our own. And so when I think about this, I think about our individual responsibility, our corporate responsibility. I want to go back to what I've said at the very beginning, but with this, I just want to say this. Run the race marked out for you with your eyes focused on Jesus. That's what we are called to do. That's how we are called to be in this race, knowing that God is going to take the things in our lives, transform us, and better prepare us for the race that we are in. Now you're thinking, but you know what? I just wish the race was easy. And you could probably look back at certain times in your life and say, you know, this race was like walking through wildflowers. You know, there's a gentle breeze, and it was 70 degrees outside, and it was just perfect, and you had no allergies as you were walking through all of the grand part of nature. But then there are parts of it. Do you know what the steeplechase is? In track, that there's this race called the steeplechase that has all the obstacles, and so sometimes the race is like an obstacle course. There's also this TV show. It actually originated in Japan, and they adapted it to the United States. It's called Wipeout. And so it's one of those things that, you know, you're running along, and all of a sudden this big giant boxing glove comes out and knocks you into next week. Sometimes the race is like that. And so there's all these ups and downs and highs and lows. And so what do we do? How do we kind of respond to this? Actually, Hebrews chapter 12 kind of gives us an indication of how we respond. Let's look at verse 25. In verse 25, it says, "See to it that you do not refuse him who is speaking, for if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape if we reject him who warns from heaven." Now, I'm just going to say, listen to gospel instruction. The word here in this Jewish church would have, like, when they would have heard listen, would have understood that it meant to audibly hear, internalize in my heart, and act upon what I have heard. And so their idea here is that we need to listen. And it would be real easy for me, preacher, sitting up here to say, so y'all, when you hear preacher preach, do what he says. But I will tell you that there's a brand of Christianity, and this brand of Christianity actually says that the preacher's words are equivalent to the words in the Bible. And that's ripe for abuse. And so it'd be real easy to say, if it's God's man, it's God's man, listen to God's man. I know this man. And I know that apart from Jesus, there is no good in me. And so I want to say that when you read, and when you hear the word faithfully taught, listen to that instruction. And not only listen to that instruction, here's the idea. If you reject gospel truth and gospel teaching, the writer of Hebrews is saying, you're not going to escape judgment here. It's no small thing to flippantly kind of go about life and just kind of be ho-hum about the Bible. But then I think about verses 28 and verses 29. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and thus let us offer up to God an acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. So we're called to be grateful, and I'm just going to say this: be grateful for the journey, or be thankful for the journey that you are on. I think there's a couple of things. There's a couple of reasons why we are called to be thankful, and I just want to let you know, we are part of an eternal community. We are part of the church. And a lot of times we go to church and we'll say, well, I didn't like the sermon today, or I like it better when Jim preaches, or I like it better when Kyle preaches, or I didn't like that song. And we miss the point of what happens when we gather with God's people. In fact, I want to read to you and just listen to this. Listen to verses 18 through 24. For you have not come to that which may be touched, to blazing fire and darkness and gloom and tempest and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg no further messages be spoken to them, for they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight of Moses, said, I tremble with fear. And so this is talking about like the Mount Sinai sort of thing. And it was scary, and it was like shaking in your boots sort of thing. And he says this is about the church, but you've come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect. That's the great cloud of witnesses. And to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Listen, y'all remember mid-2000s, all the businesses that were failing as part of the Great Recession? And there were some of the businesses that were propped up by the government, and they used the words or the phrase, too big to fail. I'm going to tell you something. Every government entity, every institution, every good business, everything that we see in our world that we would say too big to fail will fail. But we belong to a kingdom. We belong to a body that cannot be shaken. Because its foundation, its very foundation is not here, but is in heaven. We've been called to this, and we can be thankful. And we can be thankful when things are not easy. You know why? Because God is preparing us to run this race into eternity and to be part of this big, glorious, awesome, wonderful church. That it's not about whether we like the sermon. It's not about if it was too hot or too cold or whatever it may be. It's about the fact that we have gathered today. We are gathered today with billions of people. And many who have gone before us. And this is the church. This is the body. And no matter what happens here, we belong to a kingdom that cannot be shaken. So therefore, we don't have to be shaken with anything that happens. And so also we can worship. We can worship the living God. We can worship God with His goodness and His power in mind. Something so strong, something so stable that nothing can shake it. That's the kingdom we belong to. That's what God is preparing us for. And so we worship. And one of the ways that we worship, we can talk about how we sing, but one of the ways that we worship is that we offer our bodies as living sacrifices to God, holy and pleasing to Him. In other words, we run the race. We run the race knowing there are billions now waiting for our arrival. Will you join me in prayer?